Imagine the scene. Early morning. Fog drifts over a prehistoric forest. Somewhere in the distance you hear the cry of a pterodactyl. And in the middle of all this stands a man. Barefoot, wrapped in animal skin. So unshaven that a modern hipster would weep with envy. But in his hands, he holds no club. And no spear. In his hands, a loaded gun. And facing him, a tyrannosaurus. And here's the question you're now very eager to have answered. Which of them walks out of that fog alive? Remember this moment, because the answer is going to be different from what you think. So, what if they met? And what if the man already had gunpowder? Let's start with how you could even invent firearms when you haven't yet invented pants. Gunpowder isn't magic. It's saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur in the right proportions. Charcoal. The caveman has that. He sits by the fire every night. Sulfur lies around near volcanoes and hot springs. It reeks of rotten eggs. You literally can't miss it. And saltpeter. It forms on its own. In caves. In places where, let's say, organic matter accumulates. And now picture that first genius who mixed 3 stinking powders purely out of boredom, held them to the flame, and his eyebrows flew off into the next valley. So the first problem of a civilization that invented gunpowder next to dinosaurs isn't the dinosaurs, it's the idiots. Because for every person who carefully studies a new substance, there are 10 who want to find out what happens if you set this on fire. And you know what? Natural selection in such a civilization would work at the speed of light. The most curious and the most stupid would be weeded out in the very first week. Only the paranoid and the perfectionists would survive. And now think about what kind of society would grow out of people whose single common trait is a pathological caution. But back to our hunter in the fog. Here lies a trap that both you and I fall into. We picture the gun as the great equalizer. Small man, big beast. Bang, and the beast is down. But the reality of an ancient firearm would be far grimmer and far funnier. The first firearms didn't shoot. They more or less spat. A red-hot barrel that takes a minute to load, fires 30 paces, misfires every other time, and a recoil that can break your collarbone. And there you stand with this thing in front of a tyrannosaurus, whose teeth are the size of bananas, and whose speed is like a truck at full throttle. You take your shot. The lead ball enters a ton of living muscle and gets lost in there like a coin in a couch. And now you don't just have a hungry predator. You have a very angry, wounded, and, worst of all, now genuinely interested in you predator. Congratulations. You've just invented a way to turn an ordinary morning into your last. And here's the first hidden twist you didn't see coming. Firearms against dinosaurs would be almost useless in a fair fight. But humans never fought fair. Never. Our superpower isn't strength. It's treachery multiplied by patience. Picture not one hunter, but 20. They don't step out to meet the beast. They dig pits. They set traps. They drive the herd toward a cliff. And they use the gun not to kill, but to terrify. A sharp blast, a flash, smoke. For an animal that across all of evolution has never heard anything louder than a thunderstorm, a gunshot is the end of the world. And suddenly, it's not the human running from the dinosaur. The dinosaur, in a panic, charges straight into a prepared trap, while 20 hungry primates are already sharpening their stone knives. At that moment, something happens that hadn't happened in the entire history of the planet. The apex predator stops being the apex. And that changes absolutely everything. Because an ecosystem is a pyramid. At the top sit the predators. There are few of them, and they keep everyone else in fear. Remove the top, and the pyramid doesn't just sag, it explodes. The herbivores, with nothing left to eat them, start breeding and devouring everything in sight. The vegetation disappears. Other species collapse after it, and this whole green, roaring, smoking planet starts crumbling like a house of cards that someone sneezed on. And you know who that someone is? It's us again, the human, the only creature on Earth capable of breaking an ecosystem not because it's strong, but because it's clever and bored. Now for a second, close your eyes and find yourself there. You wake not to an alarm clock, but to the ground trembling beneath you. Morning in this world begins with a head count. Did everyone come back from the evening hunt? Often, no. You eat meat that just yesterday could have eaten you. And that's not a metaphor, it's just breakfast. You store your gunpowder in a dried skull wrapped in leather, because one drop of moisture and your only defense turns into a handful of useless mud. Children here don't learn to read or count. They learn to listen to silence. Because in this world, silence means a predator is already close and holding its breath. And the most terrifying sound in existence isn't a roar. It's the dry click of your own gun misfiring at the worst possible moment. And you hear that click, and you understand. This is it. This is the very moment your entire previous life was merely a warm-up for. But let's dive deeper, Because the real story isn't about dinosaurs. It's about power. Imagine that in this world, there's a tribe that mastered gunpowder first. Just one. And in their hands they hold, literally, thunder sealed in a tube. To the neighboring tribe, still fighting with sticks, these people aren't people. They're gods. They point at a cliff. The shot thunders. The cliff crumbles. What would you think in the place of a savage who has never seen anything more complex than a sharpened rock? You'd fall to your knees. You'd give them food, land, your daughters, anything, just so the thunder wouldn't turn your way. And so, in smoke and fear, the first empire in history is born. Not on bronze, not on agriculture, but on a monopoly of fear. And the first man who realized you don't need to shoot everyone, it's enough to shoot one in front of all the rest. That man invented not a weapon, he invented politics. And now, nature's dark joke. You know what happens to every empire built on a secret weapon? The secret always leaks. Always. Sooner or later, some slave or defector, or just a very observant captive, sees how gunpowder is made, and carries the formula across the border. And now, you don't have one side with thunder, but two. And both are certain that God is on their side. So in a world of ferns and reptiles, the first arms race would thunder into being. Those who yesterday worshipped a single gun, tomorrow build hundreds of them. Longer barrel, purer powder, heavier bullet. And now dinosaurs are no longer the main threat to humans. The human becomes the main threat to the human. And honestly, that's the truest part of our whole fantasy. Because in any era, give us a stone or an atom, and the first thing we'll figure out is how to hit our neighbor with it. But now, the promised answer to the very first question. Who walked out of the fog alive? The man or the tyrannosaurus? The answer, neither of them. What walked out of the fog was an idea. You see, it doesn't matter who won that particular fight. What matters is that for the first time in history, a human looked at a creature 1,000 times bigger and stronger, and thought not, I need to run, but I need to figure this out. Firearms in this world aren't about gunpowder. They're about the moment when fear stopped controlling the human, and the human began to control fear. To turn it into a tool, into smoke that makes a giant flee, into a roar that makes a neighbor submit. And here's the finale. We're used to thinking that technology is what appears once a civilization has already grown up. First culture, then science, then weapons. But what if it's the other way around? What if it's precisely the weapon, this ugly, dangerous, smoking chunk of progress, that drags the ape out of the forest and seats it on the throne of the planet? What if gunpowder in the hands of a savage isn't an accident, but a repetition, a recurrence of the very same story that has already happened? It's just that in our reality, the role of the dinosaur was played by extinction, hunger, ice, and darkness, and the role of the gun, by fire, the spear, the wheel, the word. That ancient civilization affects you right now, not because it existed, but because you are its direct continuation. That very man in the fog with trembling hands and an impossible idea in his head, he's your great-great-great to the power of 3 grandfather in spirit. The same ape that decided fear isn't a sentence, but raw material. And here you sit, millions of years later, in a warm room, behind glass, under a roof built from that very same audacity. The tyrannosauruses are gone. The fog has cleared. But the idea that emerged from it back then still warms your hands. So next time you feel afraid of something enormous, a task, the world, your own life, remember the barefoot man among the ferns. He had nothing but fear and 3 stinking powders. And out of that, he built everything. Subscribe and leave a comment if you want more stories like this. See you next time.